As of the time of writing this script, it's a fairly accepted viewpoint that Xbox and PC are part of the same ecosystem. Xbox exclusives are coming to PC, and Microsoft is doing its best efforts to bring certain PC-only games like Age of Empires and previously MS Flight Simulator to consoles. However, this is a relatively recent development. While Microsoft has always had a presence in PC gaming, it took a backseat in favor of building up the Xbox as a platform. However, after the disastrous launch of the equally disastrous dumpster fire that is the Xbox One, Microsoft needed a different direction. Eventually, it was decided to start integrating PC into the Xbox ecosystem and Xbox content into the PC sphere. It started out with a few standalone releases and a handful of ports, but things started picking up pace. Quantum Break was announced to come out on PC day and date, which made a handful of internet losers mad, but this didn't really deter the company. This all culminated with what I believe was the point in which the Xbox and PC integration was fully cemented, which was the release of Halo Reach on PC. Now, Halo Reach wasn't the first Halo game to come out on PC. Combat Evolved and Halo 2 have those honors, but these were ports handled separately and can be honestly considered as afterthoughts. Reach coming to PC was different in that both PC and Xbox players were practically getting the same things, and that it was forerunner to the entire goddamn franchise that was promised to follow suit. What's most interesting here is that there really isn't a catch to this. Microsoft and 343 were promising to bring Halo to PC, with the only string attached being a Microsoft account required for crossplay purposes. No Epic Games Store or even Microsoft Store exclusivity. Halo was coming to PC, full stop. So far, I've been making a big deal out of the Halo games coming to PC, which might beg the question, what even is Halo? The short of it is that Halo is a sci-fi FPS series that emphasizes player empowerment and dynamic, dare I say tactical gameplay. The player takes on the role of a United Nations Space Command Special Forces soldier and is pitted against various alien factions that each challenge the players in different ways. Halo games are generally lauded as having both good single-player and excellent multiplayer experiences. Suffice to say, expectations and excitement were pretty high when 343 and Microsoft announced that the Master Chief Collection was coming to PC. The entire catalog of Halo games from 2001's Combat Evolved until 2012's Halo 4, it was all headed to PCs all over the world. I was there when Reach finally came to PC, of course. Regional pricing made the MCC stupid cheap in my region, letting me pre-order the whole goddamn collection for under $15 US. This was gaming history in the making. For the first time since Halo 2 came out on PC, the franchise was coming back to PC in full force, and by the looks of things, it's here to stay. Now, Halo Reach might be the first MCC game to come to PC, but it was the last game released by Bungie before 343 stepped in. Bungie had accumulated almost 10 years of experience by the time they made Reach, and it shows. Looking back at it now, I think releasing Reach on PC first was a good choice. It was the middle ground in terms of gameplay, built on concepts and ideas already tested from 4 previous games, but not radically different like Halo 4 and 5. Compared to CE, Reach has enough modern elements to make it palatable to newer audiences, but still classic enough that it retains the core feel of Halo. I mean, Combat Evolved was 18 years old by the time the MCC was coming to PC, old enough to get drafted and sent off to war. Some of its gameplay elements frankly feel pretty dated by this point in comparison, but I'll touch on that more when I get around to reviewing CE. So how did Halo Reach feel to a franchise newcomer? As I mentioned earlier, surprisingly well. Though I will admit that Infinite's buttery smooth gameplay has spoiled me a bit by this point. One thing I want to point out is that I was surprised with how well 343 managed to translate the control schemes to PC. What few layout hiccups there were can be easily rebound. I prefer my melee to be on left alt while the default is on V, easy swap. I also have 800 hours worth of CSGO muscle memory, so I reflexively hit Q to swap weapons. Easy rebind on that one too. Granted, it's nothing as in-depth as Infinite's keyboard customization, but it gets the job done. The biggest gripe I do have with the game's controls are with the vehicles. They were designed for controllers in mind with their double stick configuration. Left stick moves the vehicle and right stick turns it. In mouse and keyboard terms, this means that we get mouse steering, where you turn the mouse to change where the vehicle goes. This becomes an issue when you're driving the Scorpion tank. You see, in other games like Battlefield or War Thunder, tanks use something called, well, tank controls. This means that W and S moves the tanks forward and backwards, while A and D rotates the hull. So if you hold A for a few seconds, the tank hull would rotate to the left independently of the turret. If you then held W, your tank would be moving leftwards relative to where your turret was facing. In Halo, while the turret can rotate independently of the hull, pressing forward will make the tank move to whichever direction the turret is pointed at, as opposed to wherever the hull is facing. This isn't an issue on controllers, since you have 360 degrees of movement on the left stick, but it's a hassle with keyboard controllers. The WASD keys don't go around 360 degrees, but instead have 8 combinations of input. This makes it an absolute fickle when it comes to maneuvering the tank. It'll work fine on linear courses, but complex maneuvering in tight spaces? Yeah, good luck with that. The infantry gameplay translates a whole lot better though. You point at the bad guys and you shoot. Simple enough. Well, there's an added layer. The Halo series has a particular design philosophy when it comes to gameplay. It's a sort of power fantasy, but not a mindless one. The weapons each have their own uses, perks, and drawbacks, and are balanced accordingly. Your empowerment comes in the form of the game giving you the tools to go whole ass on the enemy, but you still need to learn how to use those tools. Alien weapons are mostly projectile-based, visibly moving through the air, and can be dodged. UNSC weapons, then, are practically hit-scan and are far easier to be used by the players. Then there's the emphasis on precision weapons and accuracy, but automatics are still viable in their own way. Reticle Bloom punishes spamming in longer ranges, but up close and personal, it's not a big issue. Reach is Bungie finally realizing that the BR can't just be the be-all end-all of the gameplay sandbox, and the game is all the better for it. Then there's the armor abilities. Bungie's way of massively shaking up the Halo sandbox. The way they've implemented the system is a bit iffy to say the least. Some abilities like Jetpack, Hologram, Cloak, and my all-time favorite, Armor Lock, I can understand. These are abilities that serve a specific tactical purpose. Sprint, on the other hand, I'm not quite sure something like Sprint should be relegated to armor ability. Either have it or don't. This weird in-between that Bungie chose just makes it awkward. Engagements have to be balanced with player capabilities in mind, and movement plays heavily into this. Because Sprint is an optional ability as opposed to an integral part of the player's kit, combat arenas are a mixed bag. Some of them are wide to accommodate Sprint, but a few other spots feel too small when players have access to it. Mind you, this is just based on the campaign. I haven't put a lot of hours into MCC's multiplayer suite, so I'm not even going to bother going over it. But I have been told that Sprint is a really iffy subject when it comes to Reach's multiplayer. Based on what I'm seeing, I can totally believe it. Now let's go a bit deeper into the campaign's gameplay loop. After all, the player is just one part of the Halo dance. The AI, both friend and foe, make up another part of the equation. When it comes to friendly AI, Reach has two types. UNSC troopers, whose job is to feed into the power fantasy experience, and the other Spartans, whose job is to make you feel like you're a part of an elite military unit. Both are friendly AI types that are equally as important. The UNSC troopers have to toe the line between weak enough that they need the players to save them, but also strong enough that they're not total dead weight. Given how they're used in the campaign, I'd say Bungie did an alright job with how they handled it. Granted, this was my first ever Halo game, so Reach will always be my point of comparison. The Spartan AI then are... they get the job done. Not as efficiently, I think, a genetically enhanced power armor clad super soldier would, though. When you see Georgie Boy here with his big ass machine gun lumbering towards a room full of Covey troops, you expect him to tear whole ass, but a lot of the times it feels like you're the one doing most of the heavy lifting. While the other Spartans can definitely hold their own, I feel like they're only special forces because they can tank the damage instead of being more skilled. I suspect this is because the Spartan AI and the regular UNSC troops basically use the same coded behavior just with a few stat modifications. But that's just a theory. a game! The enemy AI then, on the other hand, are much better made. They're intelligent, easily identifiable, and each changes the battlefield dynamics differently. Coming from other games where most enemies are just the same looking mooks wearing similar looking uniforms carrying different guns with hardly any change in behavior, this was amazing. Enemies of different types and ranks aren't just distinguished by how many bullets it takes to kill them, but also how they react to you. The Covenant isn't just an enemy force, it's an enemy army, with structure, specialists, ranks, and battlefield roles. Elites will try to flush you out of cover, but will run for their own cover when their own shield breaks. Grunts will pin you down with their numbers. Skirmishers and jackals will harass you from a distance. It's a fantastic system and keeps you on your toes, always anticipating the next enemy move, countering with your own, and keeping the flow of combat fluid and always changing. The maps that players get to fight in are also pretty well done. You're not just fighting in linear corridors like Call of Duty campaigns. While there are a lot of those at hand, there's also a lot of open arenas where the player can engage the enemy from multiple angles of attack. This general structure follows to the general layout of the campaign missions, with good mixes of open sandbox areas where you can tackle objectives with whatever tools you have at your disposal, and tighter funnel areas that keep narrative progression going at a smooth pace. Mission variety is also pretty good. While you will be shooting at aliens for the entirety of the game, the reasons and methods changes from mission to mission. On one mission, you're rolling in at the tip of the spear, moving through fortified Covenant positions using vehicles to bring down anti-air weapons. On another, you're flying air sorties around a burning city trying to make some semblance of resistance against an overwhelming Covenant force. These aspects come together to form a very solid but still diverse gameplay loop. The gameplay in Reach's campaign is excellent and is only further elevated by the number of options you get when it comes to replayability. There are, of course, the 4 difficulties: easy, normal, heroic, and legendary. With each higher difficulty, enemies become faster, smarter, more accurate, and aggressive. Higher ranking enemy types will spawn, and some enemy types will start carrying better weapons. It's still the same game with the same rules, but the game will shuffle around the pieces on the board to ramp up the challenge. On top of the different difficulties, there's also the skulls, in-game modifiers that shake things up by a whole lot. These range from something simple like having enemies drop less ammo, to something more complicated like you only healing with every melee attack. It spices up the gameplay a hell of a lot, and I love this system. Overall, Halo Reach's campaign is a fantastic single-player package, but it can also be played in 4-player co-op. Sort of. While co-op mode is indeed playable, depending on your internet connection, you may have to deal with input delay, latency issues, and desync. From what I've been able to gather, this is a PC-only issue. Co-op seems to work fine on console, so whatever 343 did while porting the game to PC must have knocked about something in the netcode. Which is weird, since from what I've played from the multiplayer suite, these input delays and latency issues really aren't a thing. One final detail that I really liked about Reach's game system is that your multiplayer Spartan carries over to the campaign. The main character, Noble Six, isn't just a character for the player to embody. Noble Six is the player. You're not playing as a written character. You're not playing as the legendary Master Chief Petty Officer John 117. You're playing as Noble Six, a faceless soldier. You get to pick what Noble Six looks like, and honestly it gives the player a lot more reason to invest in the characters. Visually, the game has definitely aged, especially compared to newer games. While it's not top-of-the-line graphics anymore, it's still very pretty to look at. The art style definitely did the game a lot of favors. It's not the most impressive looking game anymore, but it's nowhere near a total eyesore. In fact, I'd almost argue that some of the muddiness in the textures does the game some favors. You don't expect things to be too clean and crisp in a Warzone, so it almost meshes well with the art style. Just remember, it is a mid to late Xbox 360 game, so set your expectations accordingly. The model designs, on the other hand, they look great. Not as impressive as modern day stuff, but it still looks great. Bungie took the classic Halo aesthetic that evolved from CE all the way to 3, then threw it in a blender with contemporary military aesthetics. This transforms the game's aesthetics from something like Starship Troopers to something more tactical and functional. This looks like something that armies of today could evolve into, and it feeds into the grittier and more grounded atmosphere that Reach was going for. It is fantastic. When it comes to map visual variety, it's also pretty good. Between rural mountain ranges, military facilities, war-torn urban centers, a devastated desert valley, to an alien warship, nobody can say that Reach's campaign lacks for variety. Each mission is memorable not only mechanically in how they play, but also visually with how they look. It is great. The game's atmosphere perfectly mirrors the stakes of the narrative at hand, starting off bleak and foreboding, then ending in a hopeless, almost depressing feel. Reach is a tragic war story at its heart, and the visuals really sell that feeling. On to the audio, and the game's audio is excellently designed, though admittedly the sound quality isn't as crisp or as impactful as the Halo games that follow suit. While the AR is definitely an improvement from Halo 3's popcorn maker, it's still not punchy enough. It seems to me that Bungie prioritizes making the gun sound distinct over sounding great, which is understandable, but there is definitely also room for improvement, especially compared to the kind of games PC players were getting at the time the port was happening. Keep in mind that Reach came to PC in 2019. In that same year, there were games like the Modern Warfare reboot and Insurgency Sandstorm, both of which had borderline orgasmic sound effects and design. Now, it might not be fair to compare modern games from 2019 to one from almost 9 years ago, but as it stands, that's the point of view a lot of PC players, myself included, had. That's not to say the sound effects are bad. Again, they're distinct, iconic, and sound good. Fairly good for a 2010 game, but by this point, people have been spoiled by more modern offerings. The music though, the music is unquestionably good. It's fantastic. It is stellar. It's hard to explain how great the music is. It fits the narrative beats and atmosphere of the campaign so well that I'd wager that the story wouldn't nearly be as well remembered without the soundtrack. It's fantastic, keeps the action energetic with climactic tunes and melodies that will forever be burned in your head along with the scenes that they accompany. Quieter moments also get a moment to shine, as the soundtrack knows when to let up and let you catch your breath, or, alternatively, when to rip it out of your lungs while you're trying to rest. The tracks evoke a sense of suspense, dread, and desperation that sticks with the players extremely well. It is, again, amazing. There's nothing more that can be said for the music that can't be better conveyed by just having you guys listen. So, here you go. Now finally, let's get to the main course of this subject, the campaign. And boy oh boy is it great to bite into. When I first played Reach, my friends who had played it on the 360 told me that to experience Reach is to know despair. Having played through Reach's campaign 4 different times by this point, I can wholeheartedly agree. I've said before that Reach is a tragic war story, and I mean it. Not a single mission goes by in the campaign without things taking a turn for the worse. Hell, it's not even a spoiler to say that the UNSC loses the war in Reach. The intro cinematic of the campaign starts with the whole planet burning hotter than Carrack, before focusing on a broken planet abandoned on the blasted soil. But it's not just any helmet, it's your helmet. The game pulls no punches and wants to drill into your head that you're not winning this fight. For all intents and purposes, you're already dead. But how? Well, that's for you to find out. The game's intro very quickly gets you up to speed with what's going on. You've been transferred to Planet Reach to reinforce Spartan Team Noble after one of their members died. The introductions to the characters are short, simple, but perfectly explains what these guys are. The green bald one is the quiet sniper. The big guy is the nice one. Skullface here is the team tough guy. The sassy chick is the smart one, while big blue boy scout here is the leader that holds all of them together. Out of the 10 levels in the campaign, you're paired up with each and every one of them at least twice. This is great and lets you really get to know them better for the short time that you are with them. Each member is distinct enough from a personality standpoint that you're not going to be mistaking one for each other. There's a reason why George, Emil, June, Kat, and Carter are staples of the franchise, while DeMarco, Hoya, Madsen, Grant, and Thorn are largely forgotten. I had to look up the names of the Spartan Ops characters on the Halo wiki, by the way, just to emphasize how forgettable they are. As soon as you start the campaign, you'll notice that the game feels a lot more grim than the other Halo games. The colors tend to be muted, the atmosphere is almost always darker and more oppressive than the almost colorful and plucky adventurism of Halo CE 2 and 3. This is a Halo game, yeah, but this is the Saving Private Ryan of Halo games. This heavy atmosphere persists throughout the game and it gets heavier. Much heavier as things progress. I've said before that Reach is a losing battle for the UNSC and the game doesn't beat around the bush about it. You're not even halfway through the game when the members of Noble Team outright admit that they're losing. In fact, if you've played other Halo games before, there are characters that straight up mention Reach getting annihilated. The main story of the campaign then is the characters fighting a losing war and helplessly struggling against the unending alien hordes and failing miserably. Every plan of attack, every daring operation they pull off consistently blows up in their face somehow, most often due to things simply outside of their control. The story and gameplay challenge continue to escalate side by side, perfectly capturing the feeling that the Covenant is overrunning Reach. Things get so desperate that when a sliver of hope shows up in the final act of the campaign, Noble Team jumps on it without hesitation and does whatever it takes to see it through. It's a brutal story with enough twists and turns to keep you at the edge of your seat and enough shocking moments to make you sit back and realize just how hard the Spartans of Noble Team have it. It perfectly encapsulates how harrowing the Covenant War really is, especially outside the eyes of a certain ridiculously lucky, borderline plot armor-wearing Spartan. The next bit will cover spoilers, but I'm not going to dive too deep into it. I just want to discuss some bits and pieces of the story that I find particularly interesting. Reach is one of those campaigns that you just have to play yourself to get the full experience. If you haven't played the game yet, I highly suggest you jump over to this timestamp. Otherwise, you have been warned. Are they gone? Alright. The decision Bungie made to coldly kill off Noble Team is honestly one of my favorite things in the game. As horrible as it is, I don't think the grimness of the story would stick as well any other way. George and Kat's deaths especially still stay with me, long after I finish the game for the first time and long after I finish this review. George sacrificed himself to destroy one Covenant supercarrier only to immediately have several more exit slip space jump mere seconds after, essentially making his death pointless. The same with Kat. Her death is a sudden and unceremonious shot to the back of the head. I remember during my first playthrough thinking that surely this wouldn't be the end of her. They wouldn't just kill off a major character like that without any fanfare, right? No dramatic last words, no heroic sacrifice, just being shot in the back of the head mid-sentence by a random sniper. That scene stuck with me. What also struck me a while after finishing my first playthrough is just how terribly ironic the fate of each noble Spartan is. George, the older brother and heavy gunner of the team, dies first in a massive explosion. Kat, the sassy smack talker and tech expert, gets a shot right through her cranium, cutting her off mid-sentence. June, the team's ghost and assassin, survives and is never seen again. Carter, the head of the crew, goes down with his ship and leaves his boys behind. Emil, the close combat specialist who carries around a big knife, dies getting stabbed in the back. Noble 6, the lone wolf, dies alone in a repeat of a situation that happened in the first level, except at that time, Carter was there to save you. And you know what's even worse? The most tragic thing is that had Noble Team managed to survive a few more months, they might have seen the end of the war. The game acknowledges this with Halsey's memorial speech at the end. The writers knew damn well how tragic a story they were writing, and God bless those bastards, they wrote a damn good one. If everything you've heard from this video so far has convinced you that you need to pick up the game, then the Master Chief Collection is your best bet in playing it, be it on Xbox or on PC. I mean, sure, you could get your hands on an original 360 copy, but support for that one has since been cut off and even multiplayer is dead. Realistically, it's best to get the MCC and get all the other mainline Halo games up until Halo 4 as well. On top of that, you also get almost a year's worth of new content added for all the various Halo games in the MCC, so again, it's the best way to experience the older titles. Also, if you're Indonesian like me, regional pricing makes this game stupid cheap and an insane deal for the amount of stuff you're getting. Some regions will still have to pay full price, so your mileage will vary. That being said, there is a bit of an issue with the Steam version. Microsoft and 343 want to be able to sell each game in the MCC individually, so Reach is listed as the base game, while every other game in the MCC is listed as DLC. This becomes a bit of a pickle when you're installing it, as you have to manually install each different module. It's not all bad though, since if you're interested only in the campaign and not in the multiplayer like me, you can just choose to not install any of the multiplayer modules and call it a day. It's a bit of a convoluted system, but the amount of control it gives you is well worth the complications. And well, that's all she wrote for this video. Stick around on the channel for my next videos where I take a look at Battlefield 5's war stories and then jump all the way back to Halo Combat Evolved. Remember to like, subscribe, and share the video to support the channel. This has been Cheems of Regret, wishing you all good luck and Godspeed. Signing out.